All right, thank you all for joining us for the How to Write a Conference Proposal workshop. Joining us today is Dr. Peter Gray, professor and adjunct professor at the UNLV School of Medicine. He's also the undergraduate coordinator. And we also have Nikki Bennett, who is an anthropology PhD student. Together, they are going to discuss writing an abstract or summary of what your talk is going to be about and a plan for pitching your research at almost anything, as well as share sample abstracts and criteria that is used by conference selection committees. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to them to get us started.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and I'm delighted to be here as Nikki. Nikki and I have coordinated our presentation today. So what I'll do is I'll give you a cue to move forward in the slide. I guess I'll just say it for now. Maybe I can try a finger. But you go to the next slide. And Nikki and I will be tag teaming. So what are our goals today? Our goals are what you see on this initial slide. So first we'll ask, why should you consider reasons to submit a conference proposal? How can you learn the ways to identify appropriate conferences? There's a universe of conferences out there. How do you identify the ones that are the best fit for you and to prepare and align your conference proposal submissions? You'll learn broad guidelines for writing an effective conference proposal. So we'll talk about a couple examples today, and Nikki in particular will talk about an upcoming conference she's involved in the planning for, and it'll be held in just a few months, making all of this very, very fresh and insightly, if I can make up a new word, in Nikki's head. We'll also examine sample conference proposals and rubrics, and again, some of that will come back to the conference Nikki's working on as we speak. To make this interactive, we don't want to just talk at you, we want to respond to you. We want to make sure that any questions, concerns, comments you have are voiced. Some of those will be shared with other participants, no doubt. Some people will be watching this workshop maybe a year from now online, losing the context. Put things in chat. Anything you want us to touch on, put it in chat, and we will monitor that, and we will ensure that we get to your questions, comments, concerns in the course of today, and we might address some of those if they arise in the moment and need immediate attention. We'll do so then. By and large, we will likely wait till towards the end to do so in our hour today. So why should I submit a conference proposal? Nikki knows all the answers.
Yes, and just to the bullet points are on click. Thank you. So I imagine on the surface, we all understand why we should be submitting a conference proposal, especially as students. But some of the benefits for why you should do this are not as obvious. Of course, to share your work and get invaluable feedback. Audience questions, for example, can be helpful with future directions or give you new ideas. For example, during a poster presentation, I was once encouraged to publish, and that was very helpful because I'm sure as grad students or undergraduates, we can deal with imposter syndrome. So it's nice to get that encouragement. Meet colleagues and collaborators, both new and old. I've done my best networking by attending conferences, so I can't emphasize that enough. Also, to enhance your professional presence, just doing the research isn't always enough, even if it's published. I shouldn't say just published, that's a big deal, but giving it the spotlight also helps get you out there and have that impact. Just to provide some background on that kind of ties all of these bullets together from my experience, my current project that I have going on that's collecting pilot data for my dissertation, I'm collaborating with a large corporation, and this relationship was established through a mutual contact at a conference. That's a big deal. And if I had not attended that conference, I would not have met this person, and they would not have put me in contact with person X, and here I am. Another example is I was invited to present for a group at the University of Liverpool. The person who invited me is a mutual contact who's at that university. I met her at a conference. I don't go to the UK regularly, so I never would have met her if it wasn't for that. That's just a few examples. I could probably use the whole workshop to give examples of how I've networked. So we'll go ahead and advance. So how can you find a suitable conference? Ask faculty, postdocs, and fellow students. They have been to conferences or they're going to go to conferences, and this is one of the bigger ways to find out on campus about how you can find a conference. If your discipline has a group that is well represented, as well as conference websites. So for example, the anthropology department, anthropology in general, there's several organizations that are big that anthropologists know about. They tend to either sponsor a conference or host their own conference, and you'll find that advertised through them. Of course, social media, people are sharing this, to include myself. I keep marketing the conference that I'm involved with. Googling, that's a nice new verb. You can't go wrong with using some key terms to query a search. And then last, look at the CVs of those who are in positions that you would like to be in. So if you want to be a professor, find someone who's a professor and look at their CVs that they tend to share on their About Me pages, and you can see where they've been presenting. We are in Las Vegas, which is one of the most popular destinations to host the conference. So I would also encourage you to look at calendars for local convention centers. This, in collaboration with Google, I found a conference that's occurring in March. And without me searching pet genomics and conference, that's how it came up for me that there's one in Las Vegas this March. Next slide.
So now back to me. What are the parameters for my conference proposal or abstract submission? So how do you go about knowing what you're aiming for? There are different types of submissions. Perhaps you're envisioning submitting an individual paper or poster. So in other words, you might have in your mind that you'll attend a conference. Maybe you're picturing it in person, but of course right now, and we'll come back to this, many are online, many are hybrid. Maybe you're envisioning, though, presenting a poster. Maybe instead you're envisioning a paper, like a 15-minute session or 15-minute presentation. Maybe 12 minutes of that is actual presentation with 3 minutes in the transitions for you to stand up, present, handle a question or two, sit back down, then the next speaker goes. So you might be picturing something like that, and that'll have its own process to it. And the dates for those tend to be a little bit later than, say, the initial deadlines for the next bullet point, like a session of organized and thematic papers or posters. So in other words, perhaps you want to schedule or coordinate as a grad student an invited session. And the invited session will have a theme. Maybe it's a theme aligned with the conference. Often a conference has a theme. Not all do, but often they do. Maybe you'll reach out and perhaps collaborating with or coordinating with your own advisor or advisors, identify other faculty, other grad students that you could in turn put together a thematic session. Maybe there are 6 people, maybe there are 12. This can all vary by discipline and so forth. And that kind of process is going to have a different time frame and structure to it in terms of the planning. That, of course, would have a lot more moving parts. The deadlines for an initial session or thematic session proposal and decision are going to be much earlier than those for, say, an individual paper or poster. And that overlaps with also the symposia panels piece that's there. So just to note, here in anthropology, next to me in non-COVID times would be Dr. Deb Martin. She's consistently worked with some of her PhD students to organize symposia so that the student, as a PhD student at UNLV, is meeting leaders in the field, is helping organize these things in consultation with Dr. Martin. And often an outcome of that can be an edited volume or some other special journal issue in a way that has a professional benefit to the student as well as the networking benefits as well. But that, of course, takes a lot more effort to submit and organize something like a symposium or panel than just an individual paper or poster. Regardless, pay attention to the type of submissions. If you go to websites for a conference you're interested in attending, you'll probably find some differentiation about the different types of submission, and you'll want to be mindful of what the options are and what you're seeking to do. There are other variables. Let's say you're envisioning crafting an abstract to submit for an individual paper presentation. What is the word count limit? Is there a word count minimum? Maybe it's 200 words, maybe it's 250 words max. These vary, and if you don't pay attention to that, what if you write your fantastic abstract, and not that you would wait till 10 minutes before it's due to submit it, but let's say you did, and you realize that they only accept 200 words max, and you've crafted a 250 word abstract, and now you have to pare that down in your last few minutes, and then the website's frozen too. Oh no, maybe I should start earlier. So length is one parameter to which you'll definitely want to attend. Format, do they have a format for an abstract or proposal? So let's say you want to submit a symposium. They might say, here is the relative length and the content we expect in the proposal description, plus we want lists of all the other presenters who might be in there, and we want perhaps even their abstracts too. Imagine you need to pull all of that together. That's going to take a lot of work and advanced planning. That's also again, very different from your own individual abstract in terms of the coordination and detail. Some abstracts have specific structures. They may say we want an introduction, methods, results. Some might say we allow space for you to list your funding source or sources. Others don't address that. Some might only accept abstracts for certain conferences if you have results to present. So let's say you're in the first or second year of a PhD program, but you don't have your own data yet to share. You just have some ideas that you're formulating with respect to your graduate research focus. Maybe you don't have results yet, and in turn, there might be some abstracts that require results for which you then can't meet their requirements, and you're not able to meet the requirements for that particular conference. So for one of the key ones for me, an American Association of Biological Anthropology, or AABA, that is one of the requirements, and it does in turn have ramifications for whether or not, say, a student or I could actually present our work there or not. So just be mindful of all these kinds of variables, and in turn, how do you find all that? You go to the website. You go to the website of the conference to which you envision submitting. Okay, the next slide. This was pirated from a previous UNLV Graduate College presentation on this topic because it's useful. So what are you seeing in this and the next couple of slides? How to write a conference abstract, a 5-part plan for pitching your research at almost everything, or almost anything. The key here is that there's structure. There's structure. So there's a length, but it's not that you are throwing random ideas on a paper. Rather, there's a structure and logic to it. You might start with the current state of knowledge. What do we know about a topic? If you only have 200 words, 250 words for, say, an individual poster or podium presentation that you're submitting as an abstract, you need to get to your point quickly. So maybe you can take one sentence max. Notice how this example, though, also has references. Some places may allow references, others may not. That may also be a consideration with respect to word count. That's another variable to which you'll want to attend as you're putting together your abstract. So let's say you have one sentence, though, that points to something about what we know about a topic, but then you point out a limitation in what we know. There's something wrong with all the other scholars who've attended to this issue previously, or all that other scholarship has yet to address the aspect or this other particular aspect, perhaps because there's a new technology, there's a new sample, we have a new methodology, whatever it may be, there's a gap, there's a problem. That's what's missing. And guess who's going to fill that gap in the rest of their abstract? Well, of course you are, or I am, or Nikki is. And here are the methods by which we'll do so. And here's what we've tentatively found. So again, some places may be okay if you don't have results, if you're just laying out the foundations of what's to come. Even if you can't publish on that, that might allow you to get feedback from others at a conference venue, but others may require results. So that is, in a nutshell, some structure to an abstract. So the next slide. So just to then parse this a little bit further. There's step one. So just to, again, pull that out while that previous slide talked through 5 steps. Let's just focus on the first for a moment. Start with the current state of knowledge in the field you're engaging with, and note how there is that one sentence with references summarizing some of what's known about that topic. That is helpful because for abstract reviewers, they want to know very succinctly, what are you going to talk about? What is the topic? Perhaps how does it fit in some broader universe? Maybe if it's part of a conference theme, you're also alluding to that. There might be a buzzword or keyword or something like that too. But you're helping set the stage. And if you don't give that current state of knowledge and some sort of topical cue, it can be hard for the reader subsequently to know what you're talking about and where you're going to go. Next slide. I'm going to skip over steps 2 and 3. Now we're on to methodology, and just note how there is some space devoted to methodology. And of course, this is going to vary by field. You can be an ethnohistorian, you can be you can do lab work in a biology lab, or maybe with the med school, for which your couple sentences might, with respect to methods, talk about the samples, the particular methodologies. Some of this stuff can be quite technical. But nonetheless, you'll have, whatever the field you're in, something about the process by which you did your work that you'll want to convey here in the methodology, such that the person reviewing your abstract or the person eventually looking you up at a conference when you're presenting your work will know how you did it, hence methodology. And there you saw 52 semi-structured interviews. You also get an understanding of the context and the population that participated in those interviews in that one sentence fragment about methodology in that particular example. Next slide. Step 5, resolution. We got there. So again, what did you find and why did it matter? You have a lot of space to talk about how it matters with respect to a discipline, foundational concepts, the latest understanding of a particular topic. No, of course, you're going to have to be very, very brief, but nonetheless, you probably want to draw together the work you did at the end of your abstract with some sort of implication, some sort of resolution as you've conveyed what you found and how it fits in some bigger part of a puzzle, how it's important, something about interpretation, those kinds of elements. That, in those last few slides, in a nutshell, is an illustration of how an abstract has a structure to it, has a logic to it, and you can try to apply that in your own abstract or proposal that you're putting together for a conference submission. Next slide. Here's a sample way back when at UNLV before COVID. Who can remember before COVID? I don't remember what I did yesterday. So I think I was alive before COVID because my name is somewhere on this proposal. Not anymore. So whatever answer you have in your head or you put in chat, it's a hazy world in these later days. But some years ago, a colleague, Brian Vilmore, and I co-organized a regional conference. So this is not a national, this is not an international conference. This is a regional conference held at UNLV called the Southwestern Association of Biological Anthropologists, or SWABA. Notice how it has its nice symbol there. And you can see that was November 2nd and 3rd, 2018. And I know there's a lot of text here, but why did I put this in a slide? Here's an example for what parameters we sought for conference submissions. And the parameters drew upon one of these other national/international conferences. We basically pirated their parameters for our own regional conference because they're useful. And we know that those attending, students, faculty, postdocs, are likely to already know that other example if they're plugged into the field. What are some things to attend to? What is the word length? Anyone catch that? Put it in chat or unmute yourself if you'd like. Can you write 5,000 words? No. You write a 5,000 word abstract, I bet the system wouldn't allow it. Most conference submission portals are automated such that they'll just cut you off. But if you actually got around some system that allowed that, like we didn't have such a portal there, Rachel's put in there 250. That's correct, Rachel. But if you had submitted 5,000, maybe I would have read the first 250 and then made a discernment. But I'm not going to read all that, much less from everyone else who's submitted an abstract of inordinate length. But 250 words, And notice how we also have verbiage in there saying excluding the list of authors, the title, grant acknowledgement. Yes, we will be counting, because you in turn might wonder, well, does it count towards the word count if I list the authors? What if I have 7 co-authors because I do collaborative research? Wow, boom, there go my word count really quickly. What about funding? Again, does that count towards the word limit? Also, what about the italicizing, capitalization of the title? Some of that stuff is conference specific and may even be specified in the abstract guidelines. And that is the case here. So there's an example given that we had in our call for abstract submissions, such that those kinds of things would be clarified so that people submitting their abstract would know all of those kinds of things as they were crafting their abstract. Saying that, any quick questions you have as you look at that? I'm attending to chat. How do you count characters? Good question, Cecilia. So in our case, we did not count characters. We counted words. We counted words, not characters. But that's interesting because you might find that there are some invitations that specify character count rather than word count. So that's something to pay attention to, and you should be able to find a way, whether you use a Google Doc, Word document, whatever it may be, to ensure that you do the count to ensure that you meet or are below or at the max of that. Yeah, so seriously, always having a problem with that. Yeah, do be mindful of that. And any of us who've submitted abstracts, we've all had to think of this stuff, right? Like you should always have more that you want to express than you can possibly put into that limited word count. And so it usually is a process of paring back or cutting back. And finally, you get to that magical count and you celebrate and then hit send or submit. Okay, next slide. Oh, look at this fantastic abstract, lead authored by, oh, me. Oh, yeah. Again, Life is Hazy. I guess I did. Lead author, what was a review manuscript at the time that was in review for publication. It was subsequently published. So this was a case where my co-authors and I thought, well, hey, here's an opportunity to put this work out there in a regional conference, put it in front of some other eyeballs so that they know some of the work that colleagues and I are doing. But maybe we get a little bit of feedback that might also be helpful as we're finalizing what was then an in-review manuscript that was subsequently published. It's a review of testosterone and the so-called challenge hypothesis in humans. And I'm not going to ask you right now to read through this and pay attention to the details, apart from flagging a couple things. One is this was a review paper. It was a review paper, so some of our abstract structure looks a little bit differently from if we'd done an original study focused on generation of original results rather than reviewing a body of work. That said, the very first sentence talks about what the topic is. Here's the topic, and then away we go, referencing even methods, including a citation analysis, and then some of the takeaways from the review, from our synthesis, and how that informs directions for future research. So notice the implications at the very end were things alluded to at the end of the abstract, but when I also presented this in Wright Hall in fall 2018, I followed the kind of structure you're seeing here when I gave the slide-based presentation. So that's a sample conference abstract, and I accepted my own abstract. No, we had several others who reviewed these too. But this was a low impact conference for which I'd also suggest if you're a grad student and you feel less comfortable presenting in front of the leaders of the field in an international forum, that see if there are some local or regional conferences by which you can get some presentation experience and comfort presenting in less scary or daunting venues in ways that you can then scaffold upon to subsequently prepare you for those national and international ones. Okay, next slide. And on to Nikki.
All right, so I'm currently organizing the International Society of Anthrozoology Conference in collaboration with Boise State University. That partnership came about because Dr. Gray was actually this professor's MA advisor who went on to get her PhD at UNLV, and now she's a professor. in Idaho. So I got involved with IZAS by a conference in 2017. And I've been a member ever since. And here it is, 5 years later, I'm a part of the conference planning committee. So here I'm showing an example from a 19-page document that me and the co-organizer put together for giving very specific guidelines. Each presentation type has its own specific set of instructions. And you can, I think you can just click a couple of times and the bullets will come up for that. There you go. As Dr. Gray's already mentioned, these instructions need to be followed carefully, or it can impact the reviewer's opinion. And that's regardless of the quality of work you're submitting, right? So if you aren't following instructions, then that might rub your reviewer wrong, and then they just give you a bad score from there. So make sure you're following the word count. For this conference is 300 words. We're encouraging minimal use of references. And the reason that is because I know that as students, it's ingrained in us to not plagiarize. But when it comes to these abstract submissions, we know that this is to come. We know that you're going to support your theoretical framework. You're going to support the foundation of your study, and that's going to come in the presentation. Ensure you hit each specific content that's being asked of you. You'll see a couple of slides of what I mean here as far as what content's being asked. Next slide. So here's a sample abstract that we included in our guidelines. That is not something that's standard for every conference, that they may not provide you a sample. If it is provided, use it. This is an example of an abstract that was submitted and accepted for a previous conference. So if they were successful, then they've done the right things. Not all conferences, like I said, will mention that. If they do not, you could always reach out and ask if you feel comfortable. If you know someone who's presented at the conference, then you might also reach out to them and ask them, can I see a sample of what you submitted, just so you can get an idea of the guidelines if they aren't providing that information. Next slide. So this is also another example we provided with our guidelines, and I'm just kind of breaking it down to give you an idea of what we're looking for. Notice the use of headings. So we keep talking about word count being to the point. That's how they formatted it. They formatted it to have headings and this very to the point style. The headings are nice when you don't have room to use these nice transition words or nice transition sentences. So you're telling the reviewer, you're telling the committee what this is, and then it flows much better in their head. This example only has 10 sentences collectively. So again, very succinct. They did use one reference. And again, that's okay. It is discouraged, but the way that it's discouraged is that it's a part of the word count. So again, this shows how this particular submitter was very to the point in that they were able to include a reference. I am highlighting on one little small part that there's a small typo in this example, but the quality of this abstract and the quality of the research overshadowed that one mistake, but it's still not good practice, and I would encourage you all to have someone proofread before you hit that submit button. Next. So to give an even more of an inside look, I'm going to briefly discuss the timeline of what happens after you submit that abstract, right? The portal closes, and then the conference committee is then going to undergo assigning your abstract to a reviewer. For this conference, we typically pair by specialty, and we get that information from the abstract submission best as possible. So when you're submitting for this particular conference, there's a button that says, are you interested in being a reviewer? And if you click yes, then you provide information about your specialty and what you're comfortable with. We try to pair those as best as possible, but we can't always ensure that. So that's another reason why you need to be very clear in what you're conveying in case the person that's reviewing your abstract, it's not their specialty. It's a blind review, so when me and the co-organizer assign these, we will remove the names so that the reviewers don't see it. So after we've sent it off, they have about a week. We want a quick turnaround. They have a week to give their feedback. And they're going to have, I'm going to go over the rubric that the reviewers will be looking at in the next slide. But as the conference committee, that's when we're going to look at their review and say, do we agree with this? Okay, maybe they've given a particular, maybe they've rejected it for the presentation it was submitted for, but we find that this has some merit. So maybe this person should instead present it as a poster. That is something that you could always get, so be prepared for that type of feedback. Next. So this is the actual rubric that comes from this conference. This is a form that the reviewer themselves will be completing. Notice how from the start it sets the tone for if they're going to accept it or they're going to reject it. The questions that follow are going to be their support for why they came to that decision. The Likert scale is used here. I'm highlighting that, in which for each one of these statements, the reviewer is going to say that this is poor, fair, good, all the way up to we rate this as excellent. I'm not going to go through each individual statement here, but I do want to point out, look at how each one of these statements have, is it clear? Is this appropriate? So again, making sure that you're using very clear language, that your topic is appropriate for the conference's theme. Next. And then the last part of what the reviewer is going to provide is a general overview of why, like what's the final decision. And then they can give us some comments for why they arrived at that, or anything they feel might be important for us to know about their decision. Question 11 here asks if it's a student submitting. I think this is important to show because in the past, I've encountered these questions on abstracts where they're asking me what's my status, right? Like, oh, are you early career? Are you a student? And it used to make me nervous thinking like, is this a part of the review process? Like, I'm not established in the field, so is this like already putting me at a disadvantage? That's not the case, actually. It's for award purposes. So this particular conference, they assign awards, and this example is for a Best Student Abstract Award that's presented to them at the conference itself. So don't be intimidated by those types of questions. And returning to that discussion I had about the Likert scale, the Likert scale itself will assign a score, and the reviewer does see that the score that they are assigning to you. This is important for us as well as the review committee, because let's say we have so many submissions coming through and we do have a short turnaround for how quickly these need to be done. We can quickly filter through this by saying, okay, we have 500 submissions, but we only have 100 slots. So let's just go ahead and filter it out to where if they scored less than a 3, that's a finalized decision and we don't even need to look at it. So again, that's important of why you want to hit each one of those suggestions that you're being told in the submission process for how they want this material for the conference submitted so that they can make a justified decision. And with that, I'll hand it back to Dr. Gray.
Next slide, and I see a question from Yasmin. And this next slide is about rubrics reviewing proposals. And Nikki just gave a wonderful illustration. Part of what's so wonderful about what Nikki just shared is that's all real. That's not in the abstract, no pun intended. That is real, that is happening as we speak. And this is a process that will help shape what the conference looks like, including the students presenting at it later this year. To Yasmin's question, Nikki, do you want to address that?
Yes, that's an excellent question, and the reviewer can recommend that. So it was the final part of the rubric, and it's a drop-down menu that they will see, and it will say, what do you recommend this to be presented as? And they can then select what they're recommending. So if you submitted it as for oral presentation, and let's say that they maybe recommended it for what's called a flash talk, and those are pre-recorded talks that are 3 minutes, and it's kind of like your elevator pitch. Then when we get to making the itinerary for the conference, and maybe your Likert scale wasn't high enough for us to see if we agree or not, but for your case, I'm gonna say we agreed that you scored fantastic and your oral presentation is accepted. But if not, they can make those recommendations for, maybe it's not as high quality as, say, someone who has a 20-minute platform to present their research, but it still has merit. So we're recommending that they're given this format. And we typically, we're anticipating that we're gonna honor what the reviewers say.
Well, thanks, Nikki, and thank you, Yasmin, for posing that. And to that slide, though, in front of you, it's just a question that's quite broad, just to ask if you think you'd have a better abstract if you followed those 5 steps. I think in light of what Nikki just shared for the ISAS 2022 conference, I think you could see the answer should be a yes. Perhaps there's some exceptions to the rule if there are different fields for which the expectations are really, really different. But you should be able to see a logic that's going to have its own version in the conferences to which you're envisioning applying. So next slide. Will your submission be accepted or rejected? That is the question. Many factors can go into whether a proposal's accepted or rejected. And of course, in academia, this applies abundantly from the moment you applied to a graduate program to the moment you finish your degree and are applying for jobs. As you're perhaps winding down your time at UNLV, acceptance and rejection, man, we all have to live with this stuff. It's all around us. It's part of the air we breathe in academia. And think of what you've already learned about that. Some of what you've already learned applies here too. So some conferences have lower acceptance rates. Years ago, when I was relatively new to UNLV, a PhD student from another university who was trying to kind of establish himself as in the field as a PhD student, he's since gone on to do electric stuff that's many of you would probably recognize in social media and other wider impacts in addition to his academic impacts directly. But he wanted to organize an invited session at a conference held at the Riviera. Yeah, the Riviera, which has since been imploded. So I told you, this goes back a few years. But this is one of the lowest acceptance rate conferences, the Society for Personality and Social Psychology, SPSP, in the field. And yet his invited symposium was invited. He asked me if I'd participate, I think in part because I was doing related work and I was here in Vegas. So his chance of me saying yes is higher because I wouldn't have to travel and pay for expenses. And it helped bulk up the innovativeness and other elements of his organized session proposal that was accepted, with each of our individual abstracts comprising that also accepted. But just note that different conferences are going to have different acceptance or rejection rates. Oh, can't hear or see slideshow now. Uh-oh. Cecilia, did you join? Jasmine's asking. I think the side question there in chat I'm just attending to is related to the tech issues here. Joining by a web browser has had a massive impact today in terms of our success. To this question of the acceptance rate, it varies. So for that regional conference in 2018 I referenced earlier, we wanted to accept everyone. We wanted students to have an opportunity to present, and we also wanted to prioritize students over faculty. So those were some of the things that went into that, whereas there are going to be national and international conferences with, again, quite variable, including very low acceptance rates. And you just want to be mindful of that when you're contextualizing the ultimate response you get. Next bullet point. Thematic alignment. Are you a fit for the conference? If there's a special theme for the conference or a particular session, are you aligned with it? If you're not, as you saw from Nikki's example, you'll probably be dinged. and that in turn can impact the acceptance or rejection of your abstract. So you want to be aligning what you're doing with the venues and sessions and so forth in ways that allow you to get value from this, but also allow those in the audience to get value from this. And then variation in rubrics. You know, I'm thinking in my head of a different conference for which I served as an abstract reviewer, and we had a much simpler rubric than the one Nikki just talked through, and we had probably a higher acceptance rate for the one I'm thinking through. And yet there still were a few things that were so superfluous to the conference that it would be hard to justify an acceptance to them, even when we wanted to ensure an opportunity for students in particular to have presentation experience and opportunities. So just be mindful that all this is going to ultimately factor into whether or not your abstract submission is successful or not. And like we always say in academia, don't take it too personally. You know, reflect on the experience. What did you learn from this? And I hope in turn today's conversation is helpful for putting all that in context. Next slide. We still have 10 minutes left. So what questions do you have? What other observations do we want to share? We're paying attention to chat, Nikki and I both. Again, any question you have, if you've got one, I guarantee someone else is thinking the same thing right now, or even when they're watching this recording subsequently. Put it in chat right now, please, so that we can attend to it. Next bullet point. Here are just a few observations we share as we monitor for your questions, comments, considerations, etc. COVID-19 impacts. Conferences are changing as we speak. Several years ago, most of these would have just been held in person. That's that. Now we're seeing more hybrid ones. And you also have people who might have submitted to give an in-person conference presentation, and then the conference goes virtual or hybrid, or the person has some other circumstance in life arise in which they say, I can no longer go in person. I want to do this virtually. The world knows that. And the world's trying to flex in response to all of that. But it's pretty dynamic, and we're all learning about how to operate in this new world, and just be mindful of that. And that does impact, I think, some of the things that may happen from the time you submit to then say, oh, I thought I was submitting for an in-person conference. And then 3 months later, oh, it's gone virtual. I know things that have operated as we speak for 2020 like that already. Next bullet point. How far along should a project be before you present it at a conference? I think that varies. So again, perhaps you want to submit some conceptual stuff to get feedback on it, if that's allowed. In other cases, you'll be nearing the end of your graduate time at UNLV, and this is part of the networking, disseminating your results. These are really impactful things to get the word out about your massive contribution to what we knew, to what we now know about a topic. You want to spread that word. And so the answer can vary, even if the impacts of that also vary. And last bullet point, plan early. If you want to organize a session, perhaps again with a fellow student, perhaps with an advisor or some other senior colleague in the field, plan early, because it can take a long time to coordinate all those elements, particularly if you're putting together like an invited thematic symposium, and you in turn need to have a lineup of 6 or 10 or 12 speakers. Doesn't take as long as if you're putting together just a single authored poster or podium presentation, but nonetheless, even for those, you might be submitting something that isn't actually given for 6 to 8 months in some cases in advance. So if you are only looking at the dates for a conference, you say, oh, it looks like a great conference in May. I think I want to go, I'll submit my abstract. You might find that the deadline for submitting your abstract was last fall. So just be mindful of how it's important to plan early. Nikki, any last words you have? And again, we're still attending to questions. Yasmin's posed one, and Nikki, you can address Yasmin's as you share your thoughts here too.
Yeah, I just want to comment on these last points that you've made here and say that as it relates to COVID-19, there are some people who might be hesitant to submit because of these circumstances. Like, for example, the ISAS conference is in July, and we're advertising it as in person, right? So people might be like, well, what if there's a huge, variant that comes back and I have to cancel everything and I'm not going to get money for it? Your conference committee, the reviewers, they're all human as well. So they're going to have this information in mind as well. And typically there's a statement right now by any of the conferences about their plan. So pay attention to if there's a plan in place, or don't be hesitant to reach out and ask them if there's a plan B in place. And then Yasmin, to your question about what do conference planners do to reduce reviewer bias? That's a great question. And the blind review process is a part of what we do there. So we see the names of the people who submitted. That's just inherent to the portal that we're using. But when we send it to the reviewers, they will not actually see your names. And then, of course, we can pay attention to the type of feedback, as well as we're going to see that abstract as well, and then see, does it really align from there? And that's pretty much how we're going to reduce the bias there. And that's pretty common, wouldn't you say, Dr. Gray, and how they're reducing that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the main steps. And we've all heard of Manels, and I think any conference organizers are, or at least they ought to be, of course, mindful of these kinds of things, so that we're ensuring that we have a representation in the field that enables all of us to feel like we have an inclusive space to share our work as graduate students. So that's an excellent question, and I think those are a few things that go into this. And mind you, also be active yourself in putting together your own, let's say you're planning your own symposium, coordinating your own symposium for a conference. You can actively play a role in shaping who's presenting at the conference by who you put together in your symposium in a way that is enabling you to be a part of that. You can see then, Nikki, there's another question. I'll quickly respond to that by saying I have submitted things for some conferences that don't have results yet. So the question in chat was also about a call for proposal for a conference before you have written the paper or have results available. How do you change the focus of the abstract? So I've seen things that, again, that might allow that, others that don't allow you submitting an abstract without the results. The variation, again, is out there in the world of conferences. But one question that might pop up is, what do you do if you submitted something and then you find that something didn't work out? You were going to do work and then COVID prevented your ability from doing it, or you were going to travel to an archive or work with a particular population or do something that was not feasible. So the work you could ultimately present at the conference doesn't look exactly like what was in the abstract that was accepted. What do you do under those circumstances? And that is a regular thing in academia. Folks are in these conferences aware of that. I guess my 2 cents is, being simplistic, I would say just go for it. Just move forward and acknowledge at your presentation, if your work was accepted, that here's what happened, to prevent you from, when you're actually speaking at the conference, sharing what they might have expected based on the abstract included in the conference program, because this is inherently part of the process of science. Nikki, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a really good question, because it's actually been discussed heavily with us planning this conference. In previous conferences, it was not allowed for anticipated or expected results to be submitted. But this year we actually did open it up to allow for expected outcomes, and the submitter has to sign that they agree that they'll be presenting the actual results. As to the point about the abstract, my recommendation is to write your expected outcomes or your hypotheses that you formulated as you were working on it. We expect insert, and then for your concluding sentence, how are you going to implement those expected outcomes, right? Like, based on these results, we will use blah to inform, blah, or moving forward. Like, you probably already have those ideas in your head as you're thinking about the importance of your research. And so just putting it down to paper exactly that way.
It looks like we have 2 minutes left. Last chance to raise for discussion any other things you have in mind.
Yes, we do have a couple minutes left, so if you guys have any other questions, please do feel free to enter them into the chat. You can enter the chat to everyone, or you can send them directly to me, and I can ask the question on your behalf.
clock's ticking. We're down to 1 minute. And in 1 minute, I have to go to my next WebEx. This is one of those days. I think there are like 6 of them, more or
Oh
less
boy.
successively.
Well, if there are no more questions, before we end today's session, I would just like to thank our presenters for sharing their time and expertise with us today. And also a big thank you to the participants for joining us. Before you all log off, please take a few minutes to fill out this workshop feedback survey. I'm about to drop the link in the chat. Otherwise, I hope that everyone has a great day. And let me go ahead and post that link here.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Good luck on your conference submissions. Yay!
Yes, thank you everybody for attending. And again, I'll echo good luck on your conference proposal submissions. I know that you're going to get it.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.